the topics that I'm bringing you today, well, today and the next 2 weeks that I'll be presenting, are what I call the non-negotiables. These are things that we should all be aware of, meaning, and they're not negotiable, meaning if you ignore these, there will be an absolute consequence immediately. Okay, so this is really important. Today's topic is one of my favorites, and of course it's sugar and ultra-processed foods. Has everybody here heard of the word ultra-processed as opposed to processed? Ultra-processed. Okay, so there's a difference between ultra-processed and processed. You're gonna be masters of that before we're done, because you have to know these. But, oh, and if you just walked in after I announced that, there is a clipboard going around. Put your name and email in there, and if you wanna receive my notes, or if you wanna ask me questions, that's how we're gonna be in contact with each other. If there's anything that we don't cover today that you want covered, make sure to email me that information, and I'll cover it the next time. So, God created us. We are created by God. But God also created food specifically designed for us, and we'll call that food God food. We, along the way, started creating food too. We'll call that man food. So God food is perfectly designed to have everything we need. It's perfect for that. The man food has been modified to a point where if you have it, guaranteed you're gonna have problems. All right, it's that simple. Now, we'll dig into that a little bit more, but the God food provides really good energy for the body in every way. The man food provides bad energy for the body. All right, we'll start simple. Are we all on the same page so far? Okay, good. So the more good food or good energy God food you consume, it promotes optimal mental, physical, and also I'll make an argument that it will pull you closer to that, so to God, so optimal spiritual health as well. Bad energy food, so man food, affects your metabolic system. When we say metabolic, think of everything that happens inside of a cell. Okay, metabolic is inside the cells. All right, all the processes, all the energy production, detoxification, everything that happens inside the cells. Our body's made up of trillions of cells. So disease is also a side effect of that bad energy food or a man food. Poor mental, physical, spiritual function. All right, those are all roots of diseases. So here's where I stand with all of this. I just want to kind of make a statement so you know what's on my mind. Part of the reason why I'm here today, other than Rhonda, you're on the recording, Rhonda, and Carol too. Thank you, Carol. Yeah, so is because I think there's a significant problem happening. And I think that's why you're here. I think you know that. There's a big problem going on, not just in our diet, but in the health of the people we are surrounded by, our loved ones. So I think that we're facing an unprecedented threat to our health. Now, if you look at numbers, you'll see that if you go into a grocery store, 73% of the foods inside of a grocery store, which is 73% of what we consume in the United States, is considered ultra-processed. And what you will learn is that ultra-processed foods, not only are they man food, but they have very little and some no food in there. So by definition, if we were to define food, food is defined as something that promotes growth. Right? It promotes growth. It has to promote, and it has to be absorbed. We'll go over that again a little bit later, but the ultra-processed food do the opposite. They inhibit growth, and they inhibit absorption of nutrients. And so if 73% of what we consume inhibits growth and inhibits nutrient absorption, do you think there might be a consequence at some point to that? Big, yeah, really big. Now, in the US, there's 10,000 chemicals in our food that are completely banned in most, if not all, European countries and many other countries in the world. That's a big problem. 10,000 chemicals in our everyday food, and that's 73% of what we consume. 75% of healthcare expenditure can be directly related to the consumption of ultra-processed foods. That's the problem. When we start looking at some common conditions and chronic conditions like chronic systemic inflammation, right? Everybody talks about inflammation now. Inflammation's tied to Alzheimer's, right? That's now called type 3 diabetes is what Alzheimer's is. That's tied to diet. Insulin resistance, diabetes, that's sugar and ultra-processed food. So we can't leave, we have to talk about ultra-processed food with sugar, because the impact that each one of them have when it comes to insulin, which is the hormone that allows us to absorb sugars, is the same. So you don't have to even consume sugar to get diabetes or to have some kind of metabolic problem. All you have to do is consume ultra-processed foods. Now, if you look at countries that consume a lot of sugar, but they don't have any ultra-processed food, they're a lot healthier than we are. So just important to keep that in mind. We'll dive deeper into sugar in just a moment, because there are some sugars that your body absolutely need, and it's important to recognize that. Other conditions like irritable bowel syndrome are linked to diet, acne, depression, and on this topic, I think Dusty, I almost called you Rusty because we have a dog now that's named Rusty. We interchange the names all the time. Sorry about that. We didn't name him. He came with the name. But we were talking the other day about fecal transplant. That is how we've learned so much about gut health, and that is one of the topics that I'll be talking about. Today, we're talking about sugar, but we're going to talk about the other non-negotiable, which is pooping or gut health, and 3 would be sleep. So we're going to really go deep in all of those. Those are the areas that you want to make sure you master. Everyone should know what, as much as they can about that, and do everything they can to improve it. So fecal transplants. So we've learned so much by taking feces out of one person and rectally implanting them into another person. Lots of studies, lots and lots of studies there. Again, we'll go deeper in that on a different day, but what's interesting is if you start looking at the articles that cover that, you can take feces out of someone who has acne and you put in someone who doesn't, and they're gonna have acne. You can take feces out of someone who has depression, you put in someone who's really happy and they're never depressed, and they will be depressed. So your gut health is critical. Okay, so that's one other thing that we really want to make sure we understand well, and we'll dive deeper on a different day there. But other conditions, sinus infections and migraines are linked to blood sugar. So if you have a lot of congestion all the time, again, blood sugars and ultra-processed food is something to think about. Hearing loss, autoimmune conditions, those are all linked to diet. So in the US, the prevalence of chronic pain is 20%. 20% of the US population deals with chronic pain. Infertility in men, sperm count has dropped 50 to 60% in the last decade. In women, polycystic ovary syndrome is the lead cause of infertility. So the NIH actually has proposed to rename it metabolic reproductive syndrome because it is directly tied to what we eat, to our diet, to our metabolism. Chronic fatigue is 10 to 30% of all US doctors visit. 67% of people in the US experience fatigue at work. 70% of people in the US experience sleep issues. 90% of people in the US consume caffeine daily. 85% of postmenopausal women have mental and physical exhaustion. Since the 1970s, childhood obesity has more than tripled. The very first case of non-alcoholic liver disease was reported in children, was reported in 1983. Now, 20% of all children have it. Something's changed, and we're not heading in the right direction. It's getting worse. We now have epidemic levels of children mental illness. It's at 20% of children. just trying to make a point. Hope I got your attention. According to JAMA, that's the Journal of American Medical Association, so JAMA Pediatrics, ages 13 to 17, anxiety and depression has increased 29% between 2016 and 2020. I would argue that, or state that it's probably worse than that since 2020, right? Because a lot happened between 2020 and now. And there's many other metabolic conditions like dementia, stroke, heart disease, respiratory disease, arthritis that all can be related to diet. So what we eat is important. And in the US, 73% of our diets are ultra-processed. Again, it inhibits growth, it inhibits absorption, and it robs you of energy. No wonder 70% of the population doesn't have enough energy. It makes sense. I'd like to read just a couple of verses here, and it's not the Daniel diet verses, but just a couple of verses that I think can maybe help us stay a little bit more focused on what we're here for and how important it is that we make decisions that draw us closer to God as opposed to pull us further away from Him. So just listen to all of this here before try not to pick at the verses. Obviously, I don't think the intention was exactly what I'm going to read them about, but I think it'll make a lot of sense when I read it. So Colossians 3, verse 1 says, you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. And Colossians 3, verse 2 says, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. Colossians 3:15, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. So my question for you is, can you have peace when your body is inflamed by having an immune response to the foods that you're eating? Can you have peace when you can't sleep well and you're irritable? Can you have peace when you don't eliminate waste out of your body fast enough and it just builds up in your system? Your body heals and your brain detoxes when you sleep. And if 70% of the population is not sleeping well, that means we're not getting rid of those toxins well enough. And the question I have for you is, do you think that makes it harder to have a closer relationship to God? Now, we could certainly say that you can have all these things going on and you can have an absolute sturdy relationship with God, right? You don't have to have great physical health to have great spiritual health. I think we can all agree to that. The point I want to make is that it just makes it harder, a lot harder. And so I think that's our responsibility to do everything we can to not make that relationship more challenging than it should be. And that's my perspective. So my perspective is to let the peace of Christ rule in your heart, set your mind on God, consume what He created for you to live on, and avoid the things that separate us from Him, whether they're foods, whether they're thoughts, or whether it's our actions and the relationships that we have. All right. Let's talk about sugar. All right. Now, the thing with sugar is its design is naturally addictive. And that's really what happened to ultra-processed foods. Would you say that there's less people smoking now than before? Yeah. People caught on, they're like, yeah, this is just not good. Let's just not do it. And a generation goes by and then a whole lot less people smoke. Well, the industry that is behind tobacco, they shifted their focus into food. And that's really what happened, is they had a product that was addictive that the next generation is just not buying. And they had to shift their focus and start buying food companies and get all their scientists working on food. And what they've done is that they've been able to create food that is cheaper and that is much more addictive. And so that's what's happened to us. So now, if I start telling you what all the God foods are, and I say, just eat those God foods, all the things that God made, the 99% of the time, people look at me like, there is nothing left to eat, only the things we were meant to eat, they're still there, but that's just not how we think anymore. We're completely conditioned to seek for those foods that are created in a lab. They're not even food anymore. I mean, if you read the label on some of these, there's a paragraph of things that you're like, what is that? You know, you can't even pronounce it. You know, it's all lab created. And that's what we're doing. You know, that's the choice we're making. And it's hard. You know, it's not fair. It's really, I talk to my kids all the time about it. They're like, why? It's so hard to say no to these. I mean, they're meant to be addictive. And you know where they start? Baby foods. You look at, it's almost all ultra processed. And the pediatrician are pushing it, everybody's pushing it. They're getting you right at the earliest time in your life. Try to beat that. If you get addicted right in those first few days, try to fight that as you grow older. It's the hardest addiction to break. And that's where they start. So that's what we're up against. So when we talk about sugar, it's really important to recognize that there's different types of sugars. Glucose is one of them. Glucose is found all over the body. You need glucose. Like, you won't survive without it. The cool thing is that if you consume no sugar, your body can do something really amazing. It can take protein, and it can take fat, and it can make glucose out of it. It's called gluconeogenesis. That is the best form of glucose you can get. The other cool thing about glucose is that you don't need insulin to absorb glucose. Your muscles, your brain, you need glucose, right? One of the 3 essential parts of keeping a neuron or brain cell alive is glucose. The other one is oxygen, and the third is activation, right? So if you retire, you want to stay active, you want to keep learning, you want to keep challenging yourself. But glucose is critical, so critical that your body will make it if you don't have enough. And that actually is the best source of glucose. So that's glucose. Now, sucrose, that's the sugar that's found, you know, that's the sugar that you buy in a store. It's the sugar that's you typically, like cane sugar is sucrose. Now, sucrose is made up of 2 different kinds of sugars, and glucose is one of them. So that's good, right? We can get glucose through sugar, cane sugar. The problem is not the glucose. The problem is the other sugar that comes with it, and it's called fructose. And fructose is a sugar that is found in fruit. All right, we can call it fruit sugar, but now it's in a lot more places. So when you consider, let's just to try to keep it simple, and I know I'm kind of going fast here, so it could be a lot of information coming in quickly, but let's consider sucrose, and let's consider high fructose corn syrup. The main difference between those two, because they each have the fructose and they each have the glucose. Each one of them has both. There is one difference that makes one liquid and the other one crystal or solid. All right? And so the high fructose corn syrup, that's what you're going to get in your juices and your soft drinks and all those places. It's deadly. It's so harmful to your body, especially to your liver. So here's the difference, and here's the reason why. The thing with fructose is your body cannot process it. It goes into your body like a toxin. And yes, it's in fruit, and I'll get to that in just a minute. When fructose comes in, the only way to safely get rid of it, there's actually 2 ways, but the number 1 way is through your liver. Your liver has to process it. And yes, that's where insulin comes in. Insulin comes in and helps to, whatever doesn't get picked up by the liver, insulin will come in and it will save you. Insulin saves the day because it gets that sugar, and where do you think it puts it? Fat, to protect you. You don't need insulin. Insulin is there as a protective mechanism, but you don't need insulin to get good quality sugar into your cells. Hope that makes sense. Insulin is a hormone, and the more insulin you produce, the more hormonal problems you're going to have, guaranteed. The more fat you're going to have, the more it's disruptive, not just the hormonal system, but all other systems as well. So the goal in life is to trigger and to utilize as little insulin as possible. That should be our goal. So now, fructose can also be saved. We could be saved because of fiber. So fiber can actually bind to the fructose and carry that all the way into our intestines and feed that fructose to our friendly bacteria. Hopefully we have those. Because if we don't, it's going to feed the unfriendly ones. And if our microbiome is out of balance, we are growing bacteria that are harming us. We're going to talk a lot more about that in the future, but one important thing you need to think about, and this is where it takes us back to the fecal transplant. You guys, there's a lot of information on that. You can look it up. We're going to talk about postbiotics on a different week. Have you ever heard of postbiotics? You heard of prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics. That is the coolest area to live in, because if you start looking at postbiotics, it is phenomenal what you can do with that. You can give your body postbiotics for sleep, postbiotics for different purposes in your body. It's really, really cool, and we'll get into that. So you don't want to miss that session. But postbiotics is basically it's what the bacteria produce in your system, and the friendly bacteria's job is to produce postbiotics that'll be good for you, that'll have very specific functions in your system. All right. So just a little teaser for next time. So let's get back to sugar. The difference between sucrose and high fructose corn syrup is high fructose corn syrup is liquid. Sucrose is solid. High fructose corn syrup, the glucose molecule and the fructose molecule are unbound. In sucrose, they're bound together, which is better than unbound. Unbound will make it a little bit more harmful in your system. So, the hero of the story when it comes to fructose is fiber. The reason why we can eat fruit that have fructose in it is because the fiber binds to the fructose and protects us from the fructose. It brings it and it feeds it to the bacteria, which is a good thing. The second you take an apple and you turn it into apple juice, the fiber's gone, right? And now you don't have fiber to protect it. The hero of the story, of the sugar story, is fiber. There's two other heroes too, and that could be fat and protein, but fiber, because fiber is the one that's coming in to save you. The fat and protein are great because they can make the sugar that you need. So your diet should be predominantly fat, protein, and carbs that have fiber, as God made them. When we start modifying it, that's when we run into some trouble. All right, insulin is a hormone. Your goal is to produce as little insulin, or to utilize as little insulin as possible, okay? Do you understand how insulin kicks in, right? If there's too much sugar in your system, you have to be, that's dangerous. You have to be protected by it. Insulin comes in, it saves the day, pulls the sugar out, stores it up. Now, one important thing I think to understand about sugar is that cancer loves sugar. Cancer cells have 50 times more receptors to absorb sugar than regular cell. So if you want to fight cancer, you have to starve it. And eliminating sugar and letting your body produce the sugar you need is the best way to go. And you do that with protein and fat and fiber. If you need an alternative, you know, it's a hard change to make. My ultimate favorite sugar alternative that is not actually sugar, but it tastes better than sugar without any of the negative side effects, is monk fruit. Number one, best one. To this day, we're not finding any consequences of monk fruit, and it tastes really good. The problem is that it's much more expensive, a little bit harder to find, but you can find it online on the internet, and more stores have it. So let's classify our processed foods. There's 4 classes, 4 categories for processed foods. Categories 1 to 3 we'll call acceptable. We can have those. Category 4, that's the one that we want. That's the ultra-processed category that we want to avoid as much as possible. I'm going to send all this information to you, so don't feel like you have to hold on to everything. So unprocessed or minimally processed foods are category 1. Okay, so unprocessed or natural foods are obtained directly from the plants or animals and do not undergo any alteration following their removal from nature. Minimally processed, you may subtract parts of the food, but you do not add anything to it. Okay, we're still in category 1. You don't add oils, fats, sugars, salt, or anything else to it. So we're still in that category 1 there. That's like you take an apple. If you cut it up or take the peel off, it's still category 1, all right? Category 2 is processed culinary ingredients. That'll be like if you want to add some cinnamon on your apple. The cinnamon part is at a category 2. It's extracted from somewhere. So in here you may have let's see any examples. I'm going to send this to you, the full list. So it could be like oils made from seeds, nuts, fruits. It could be butter, lard, coconut fat, honey, syrup. White, brown, and other types of sugars are actually in this category. Again, it doesn't mean that they're good for you. It's just that they're in category 2. And yes, it's okay to have some, but in moderation. And again, if you have sugar, what do you have with it? Fiber. Yeah, exactly. Every time you think of sugar, think of fiber. The worst thing you can have is a liquid sugar drink. There is nothing worse than that, especially if it's got additional ultra-processed items in there. Okay, number 3. All right, so category 1 was the apple. 2 was like the cinnamon or maybe another, it could be peanut butter that you want to add on your apple. That's category 2. Category 3 is called processed foods. Now, there's a whole lot of foods that are processed, but that we can actually say, you know what, these are safe. We can have these. That's acceptable. And so, ideally in smaller quantities, but still acceptable in moderation. This would be like applesauce, for example. The applesauce has probably been pressed. It's likely that it's been heated or cooked. They may have added a few other ingredients to it to enhance the flavor. Okay, now you're in category 3. But category 3 has only 2 or 3 ingredients. When you start adding a lot more ingredients, you're getting away from that category and getting closer to the ultra-processed. And this is a little bit gray because you can make the argument like I brought some pasta here that my kids really like. It's called Banza, and there's 4 ingredients in here. You know, they're all considered, you know, good ingredients. So you're getting at 4 or, you know, 5 ingredients, you're starting to get further away, but these don't have any seed oils, they don't have any inflammatory oils, they don't have any kind of processing that's harmful, and they are grain-free, my favorite. I'm not a fan of grains. Now, there's some people who can have grains, and again, Sue Becker will talk about that. I personally get an immune response to any grain, doesn't matter where it comes from or how good it is. My immune system is just conditioned now to kind of fight it, so I stay away from them completely. But there are a lot of people who can have them, and if you do, then you want to try to have, you know, grains that have all of their parts, right? You don't want to have grains that are so heavily processed that you're getting just bits and pieces of the least nutritious component of the grain, and that's what we have in our stores. Very harmful. It's like, you look at bread on a shelf that's packaged up, that is like pure sugar. It's a mix of sugar and ultra-processed components. It's not, I mean, we shouldn't even call it bread anymore. It's one of the most harmful foods in our diet. Clinically, I can tell you that the 2 foods that we remove that has the biggest impact on the health of people are going to be grains, including corn, and sugars. You remove those, and people experience dramatic changes in how they feel. Okay. Processed foods in category 3 contain items from category 1 and category 2 put together. Okay? Does that make sense? So we're processed, like these items are processed, but we're not in the ultra-processed category yet. When you get into the ultra-processed category, that's when these foods have already been associated with increase in cancer and many other conditions. It's established. Ultra-processed foods are industrial formulations made entirely or mostly from substances extracted from foods, derived from food constituents, or synthesized in laboratories from food substrates or other organic sources. And a lot of them, like we said before, contain components that are not even called foods. So, how much time do we have? We're done? Okay. All right. I will have to pick it up where we left off for next week. But I think I get my point across for the most part.